The Apostle Paul wants nothing to do with me. Imagine having that in your resume. But it didn't deter Mark. Well, like a bad dream, I'm back. Today we're going to do episode 33, and the next lesson is episode 34. And the two actually run together conjointly. I think you'll see what I'm talking about as we get into it. Today we're going to talk about the fact that some missionaries start poorly, but end well. You know, we often talk about missionary successes or even missionary failures, but rarely is somebody always good, always successful, or always incorrect or unsuccessful. Some start well and end poorly in missionary work, like Demas. Others start poorly but end well, like John Mark. John Mark was the son of a lady named Mary. She's mentioned in the scripture, but she's not Mary, the mother of Jesus, or Mary Magdalene. The early church actually met in her home, the church in Jerusalem, that is. So if you recall when the church had gathered together to pray for Peter, who was captured and in prison, and then he came and knocked on the door, that was John Mark's house that he was knocking at. Why did he go there? Well, he was related to Peter, and he was also related to Barnabas, Paul's first missionary partner. Barnabas and Paul took Mark with them as their assistant and protege on their first missionary journey. They went to Barnabas' homeland, Cyprus. You read about that in Acts chapter 13 and verse 5. However, at the second stop on their journey in Perga, John Mark, for some reason, abandoned the team and went home. Sometime later, after Paul met with the council in Jerusalem, Barnabas suggested that they allow Mark to join them again. He wanted to give his nephew a second chance. Despite his admiration for his superior, Paul was so adamantly opposed that he and Barnabas parted ways, never to minister together again. This denouncement would have discouraged most men beyond repair. The Apostle Paul wants nothing to do with me. Imagine having that in your resume. But it didn't deter Mark. Whatever had persuaded him to abandon the team years earlier had been cast aside and was no longer a weight to deter him from running his race. Even before Paul's conversion, John Mark had been with Jesus often, and even on the night of his arrest. And now, within a decade of Paul's rejection, Mark had gained experience under the tutelage of both Barnabas and possibly Peter, another relative, and once again had evidently served for some time with Paul as well, which we read about in Colossians chapter 4 and verse 10. Years later, according to tradition, he would serve as a translator for Peter in Rome, start the church in Alexandria, become its first bishop, and write the Gospel of Mark. A few years after Paul's rejection of John Mark, he wrote to the church at Colossae and told them to welcome Mark. And then as Paul awaited his execution in Rome, he sat to write his last letter, which is 2 Timothy. He told Timothy that Demas, who had started well, had now forsaken him and that only Dr. Luke was with him. He asked Timothy to come visit, to bring him his books to read, his parchments to study, his winter coat, and to bring John Mark with him because, Paul said, he is profitable to me for the ministry. Paul, who once refused to train or even work with John Mark, now chose him as his final ministry partner. At the end of his life, Paul did not call on any of the men he had personally trained or nurtured, but on the one man Barnabas had patiently discipled, who started poorly and ended well.
Our churches have lost many men because we did not have the patience to deal with them. Do you know of any such men? I do. What can we do to reclaim them? Some have said the church is the only army on earth that shoots its wounded. Is that a good testimony for us to have? When a pastor, preacher, or dedicated worker falls due to lust, should we abandon him forever as being useless to God and man? Or should we restore such a one in the spirit of meekness, considering ourselves, lest we also be tempted? Can you start on that today?
We hope you've enjoyed this episode in our Understanding the Great Commission series. If you'd like a copy of the book, it's available in paperback, audiobook, and digital download. Just click the link in the description below. Thank you for watching.